Well, this will be the last video in the Madrid Build-A-Board series. We've talked about shaping the board or designing the shape, then number 2, actually doing the shape, cutting the board out, sanding rails, all that good stuff. And in this video, we're going to talk about the finishing process. The finishing process involves 2 things. It involves sealing the board, keeping out moisture, and it also involves any artwork that you might want to do on there. To seal the board, you basically have about 3 options here. You can use a simple can of polyurethane spray. It's probably the easiest way to do it. All it does is seal the board. It doesn't make it look any different. You can use a wood varnish. That's step number 2. It will change the tone of the wood. It'll bring out the wood grain, and you can adjust how light or dark or, orangey or yellowy you want the wood to look. And you can also simply paint it. Now, quick note, you do not want to paint the top of the board where you're going to put the grip tape. The grip tape will adhere to the actual layer of paint, and then if and when the grip tape likes to rip up, it will just slowly rip all of that paint off, and the grip tape won't really stay on at all. So for mine, I used 2 of those. I used a coat of polyurethane spray for the top. It's very easy. It applies like a, spray paint, and it works very quickly. For the underside, I did paint it. So the first thing I had to do is decide what color spray paint did I want, the main color to be. I didn't really want to go with, a bunch of different colors. In this case, I went kind of simple. I ended up choosing a primary color and then a secondary color to work with. Now, I went with, for my primary, an orange color. And I'm not even going to lie to you, I'm not even that big on orange as a color itself. However, the reason why I went with orange is because I was going to apply an image that was already set to the board itself, which I'm going to do later. And the 2 main colors in this image were a light blue as well as a pretty standard looking red. So when choosing colors to work with, you want colors that obviously do work together, that you don't want them to clash. What I did is I used a color wheel to pick my colors. Since blue is the main color in the image I was using, I wanted something that would work well with that as well as the red. Now, when you're using a color wheel, you either want to choose colors that are opposite of the color you're working with, or you want to choose colors that are directly next to that color. So with the main color being sky blue, opposite of that on the color wheel would be an orange. I also noticed that the secondary color there, being red, was also next to orange. So orange was kind of the common color between the 2 that was more or less guaranteed to work. So now begins the painting. Now, it should be noted that I'm not really an expert in the painting process. I'm not really an expert in any of these parts of the process, but the painting definitely is probably the part that I know the least about. So there's probably a lot of other YouTube videos on how to apply spray paint in a really good way, so watch those. The basics are that when applying spray paint, you want to go like 8 to 12 inches away from your subject. Just read the can, it'll tell you the correct distance. And the biggest thing is that you don't want to let the spray paint sit in one spot too long, right? You want to be constantly moving that can across the subject matter. When you let the can sit for too long in one spot, the wet paint builds up on top of itself and then it starts to run, and then you get those streaks that you don't really want from a spray paint. You want it to be just kind of a flat color. Another thing about spray paint is you want to work slowly, applying light coats many times. Now, usually I can do a board in about 3 coats. However, I ended up doing about 6 or 7 on this one because I used a Sharpie to make that center line down the middle. And once I was done, measuring everything out, I probably should have erased that Sharpie line in retrospect, because what ended up happening is that Sharpie just kept showing through all of the different layers and coats of paint that I put on. So I had to do a ton and probably wasted some paint, but it is what it is. Once I was done with the base layer of orange paint, I went ahead and started applying my secondary color, which is a bit of an off-white. Most neutral colors, blacks or whites, and some things in between grays, will pretty much work with other colors as well. I applied the white in 2 locations. I wanted to make a border around the image that I was going to create, but I also wanted it to be somewhere else because I wanted to break up from the orange. I ended up going with a spot on the tail, just kind of like a strip along the back. I'm not super sure if I like it because it ends up looking like one of those, tail drag blocks that you can put on your board, which is fine and all, but I don't know. I don't really like the way they look. To apply these secondary colors, I used a painter's tape to block off the areas where I didn't want it to overlap onto the orange. And then I also used a sheet of cardboard to kind of block off any extra overspray. There was a small amount of overspray, but it's almost not noticeable, so I think I did a pretty decent job there. Finally, the last thing is probably the most interesting part of the image, which is the actual image itself. Now, what I did, and I've done this before on several other boards, is I took magazine paper, images from an actual physical magazine, cut them out, and then I used a thing called Mod Podge to apply it. Mod Podge is a arts and crafts kind of material that you can use. It works like a glue and a sealer at the same time. It comes in a lot of different forms, but I use the version that is called Hard Coat, which is a little bit more durable than their other ones and is advertised as something to be used where something is going to receive a lot of wear, like a skateboard. I applied Mod Podge in 3 spots. One, I applied it directly to the board where the image was going to go. Next, I applied it on the back side of the image where the image was going to be placed onto the board. And third, I then applied a coat on top of the image once it had already been placed down and had set. From there, you should use some sort of roller to try and get out all air bubbles. There actually are Mod Podge advertised rollers. I have one. It was like $7 or something like that, so I ended up getting one of those, and it works pretty well. There's a couple of air pockets in there, so you'll learn as you go. Once that image had been set, the board is pretty much done. After that, I applied grip tape and put the trucks and the wheels on. And here's the finished product. So, altogether, it went pretty good. There's a couple spots where it did not go so well. For one, definitely some paint on these corners, especially where the white was applied. So I'm not sure if the tape was all the way down, maybe some of the paint snuck under there. Number 2 thing is I missed one of the mounting holes, which is always annoying, but it is what it is. Like I said in the previous video, they're pretty hard to line up correctly. Now I would just drill it again, but the problem is that the hole is just off by maybe 1 millimeter or 2, and so all I would be doing is making a larger hole where a bolt can just kind of shift around. 3 bolts is not the end of the world when it comes to setting your board up. 2 bolts, probably don't want to do that, but 3 bolts is gonna hold it down. Just check the nuts on there every once in a while. Last thing is that this tail, I don't really like how big it is. And at first, I thought I just wanted to chop down the tail eventually, you know, in a couple weeks when I want to. But I came to find after skating it, I'm pretty sure what I should do is actually just push this truck back a bit. I want to say I measured about 0.75, 3/4 of an inch from where the tail actually starts to rise up as where I put my truck. But what I didn't really think about is that that's probably more appropriate for a TKP truck because of where the axle is placed. On a TKP truck, the axle is closer to the outer bolts. On an RKP, the axle is closer to the inner bolts. So if I want the geometry of the tail to line up with where the axle is, I actually, for an RKP truck, should push it further out towards the actual tail. Altogether, I'm pretty happy with the shape, with everything about the board for the most part. Altogether, pretty happy with how the board went. I'm looking forward to skating it, I guess, a little bit more this summer. And yeah.